Welcome to my channel. So today I want to talk about a recent video by Anthony Brian Logan. Before we get started, I want to say that I really enjoy Anthony's content, I'm subscribed to him, and I think he generally does an amazing job at breaking down political issues. But I think he misses the mark with a recent news story about a Christmas tree cross, and I thought I'd make a response video about it since this sort of thing seems to pop up every year. Not that he's likely to see this video, but I'm going to make it anyways.
Today is Monday, December the 12th, 2016, and today I want to talk about a story of hypocrisy and religious freedom being trampled upon in a small town called Knightstown, Indiana. Now, this whole kerfuffle going on over there is over a large Christmas tree display that's right in the town square where everyone can see, with a lighted cross on top. Now,
This story really has nothing to do with the tree and everything to do with the cross. If the tree was sporting a star on top, we wouldn't be talking about it.
I say lighted cross, I don't mean KKK with the cross on fire. I'm talking about Christmas lights to make the cross look nice and pretty for a Christmas celebration.
The cross does look pretty, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a cross to look that way. It could easily be a star or some other tree topper.
Now, before I get too deep into what's going on here, before I get into who the belligerents in this case are, and before I get into why there's a lot of hypocrisy, what I want to do right now is show you some video from their local news to explain a little bit to you about what's going on, to give you an understanding of the kind of people that are there in the town and also who the belligerents are. So before we go further.
So we're about to see a newsreel about this lawsuit, but I really want you to pay attention to how they frame the story. You'll notice they pay more attention to how people feel about the lawsuit than they do about whether or not it's a legitimate lawsuit.
Go ahead and roll it.
Talking to people all along the square and couldn't find anyone who was reacting positively to this lawsuit. That's because a lot of them say this tree has lit up the square here in Knightstown for as long as they can remember.
Right away, we see an appeal to tradition, which is a common fallacy. It doesn't matter how long they've been doing it for. That doesn't mean what they're doing is legal.
But the cross at the top might not be here much longer.
It's just hard to believe that this is going on.
I think it's kind of ridiculous.
You got to sit down and talk about it before you file the lawsuits.
So lots of emotion with that clip, but I'm not sure why you would have to sit down and talk about it if your rights are being trampled. I suppose the plaintiff could have talked to city officials to see whether they'd be willing to take down the cross, but he's under no obligation to do so, and I'm betting the city would have just laughed at him anyways.
Every one of the Knightstown residents we found near the square said the same thing. They can't understand why one of their neighbors would sue their town over the annual Christmas display.
In my opinion, I think it's a little bit of disgrace, I think, to our town.
The ACLU filed the lawsuit against Knightstown on behalf of Joseph Tompkins, who lives there. The case documents show Tompkins takes issue with the cross at the top of the tree. It says Tompkins, quote, is forced to come into direct and unwelcome contact with the cross display every day, which has caused him irreparable harm.
I'll admit that the irreparable harm part is nonsense. It just sounds whiny and petty. I know it's likely just legal talk rather than an actual claim of harm, but it still sounds completely over the top for something like a Christmas tree.
A couple weeks ago, they had a crowd here. Everybody was here. They lit the tree. Everybody was fine with it. But now you got one person, out of everybody.
Mark Tompkins is related to Joseph Tompkins. Mark says he doesn't buy the claim that Joe has been harmed in any way by seeing the cross.
There's a church on every corner here. There's a church on every corner. Is he, offended by all the crosses?
There's a clear difference between crosses on church-owned property and those that are funded by the government on public land. Even if he is offended by those crosses on church land, there isn't a thing he can do about it because they're protected by law.
The lawsuit does specify that Joe Tompkins doesn't want his taxes helping light and maintain a religious display on town property. A man who lives next to the display says they can solve that by giving Joe his money back.
I think we can find people in this town that can replace that 0.00% of the cent to give to him and not have to worry about it.
Everyone I spoke to says they support the town fighting this legal battle.
So they support wasting taxpayer money to fight a losing battle.
And if the cross has to come down, Mark Tompkins has a solution for that too.
He can take it down, and I'll tell you what, I'll park this car here until Christmas Day with 3 crosses on it.
I just received an email from the ACL lawyer handling this case. The statement from Joe Tompkins says that what this case is about is the Constitution, and particularly the First Amendment with regard to establishment of religion. At this time, the town council says they don't have a comment yet, so we don't know whether they're going to fight this legal battle, as some say they want them to do, or whether they'll take the cross down.
So you have to wait till the end of the story to hear about the real reason for the lawsuit. You'd think a news organization would have figured that bit out first and led with it, instead of leading with emotional arguments and appeals to tradition. Anyways, let's see what Anthony has to say about this.
Okay, so you see what's going on there. Now, you have one guy who's triggered at this so-called offensive display, is causing irreparable harm and stuff like that. Now, before we even get into why, that's just silly. What my man said that they were interviewing was right on point. He's like, look, there's churches everywhere in the town. You know, and you, of course, with a church, you have a steeple usually, and at the top, it's a big cross. If it's not a steeple, it'd be right on the front of the facade.
Anthony, do you see the ground that the church is on? It's their property. It's not public property. The cross was paid for by the church, not by a government agency. These are important distinctions.
And beyond that, it's a church. Right now, the guy's complaint, who's complaining about the tree being in the middle of public square, he's saying that he does not want it to be lit and funded and maintained or whatever by the town. But my thing is, how are you going to say that harms you? If that harms you, then why do the churches not harm you?
I think he's right here. Like I said earlier, the irreparable harm part is just silly. It's not like a cross is going to physically harm you.
It doesn't make any sense. If the symbolism harms you, then all the symbolism must harm you as well. It seems kind of weird. And the biggest thing here is the fact that you have the ACLU, who is supporting this person and helping them with the case. Now, the ACLU, if you don't know, that's a Jewish ran organization, and their whole thing is to be like a watchdog group against hate crimes against Jews and stuff like that. That's the American Civil Liberties Union. I'm not really sure what the exact acronym or whatever abbreviation is. My whole point is that this is a Jewish ran organization coming after a Christian symbol.
The ACLU's goals are to, quote, preserve the individual rights and liberties guaranteed by the Constitution and laws of the United States. Even if they are a Jewish-run organization, that really doesn't matter, Anthony. What matters is what they do, and they aren't just coming for Christian symbols. They're bringing this lawsuit forth because it violates the Constitution, and that's what their organization specializes in. I also tried to find evidence for your assertion that the ACLU is a Jewish organization, but couldn't find anything besides hate sites and blogs that make the same assertions. I even looked up their founders and found nothing to back your claims, so I believe you were either mistaken or misinformed.
Now, that might be okay if you say you're fighting for the First Amendment, even though that's not right, but I'll get to that a little bit later. But the hypocrisy here is that you have a 30-foot tall menorah.
Okay, so the menorah he's talking about here is on the White House ellipse. There's also a giant Christmas tree on that same ellipse.
On the White House grounds every year, right, for Hanukkah. And that's been going on since Jimmy Carter. Now, right when that happened, to be fair, right when they tried to get that done, the Jewish organization that's behind it, and it's privately funded, by the way.
There's one big difference between what you're talking about now and the Knightstown Christmas tree you started this video with. One is privately funded and one is publicly funded.
But the menorah is on White House grounds, and the presidents light it every year since Jimmy Carter. Now, in their defense, someone did try to sue them based upon the First Amendment, which is also false, which I'll get to later. But they lost that case.
So the menorah was challenged, but they lost. Was that because of favoritism, as you seem to be implying, or because of other factors, such as where the menorah is located on the ellipse, the addition of other Christmas symbols, and the fact it's privately funded and not publicly funded? I don't think it has to do with some conspiracy against Christians, or have anything to do with Jewish people, Anthony. In fact, I dug up this piece by the Washington Post that describes the first menorah lighting and how it got approved. It says, but when Shemtow's father, when the leader of Washington's Chabad community, organized the first national menorah lighting in 1979, the event drew only a dozen people to Lafayette Park, where it was then held, Shemtow said. It almost didn't happen at all. The Secretary of the Interior initially denied Shemtow's father a permit to put a menorah on government property, saying it would violate the First Amendment. Shemtow's father called his friend Stu Eisenstadt, an advisor to President Jimmy Carter. Eisenstadt gave the secretary a choice, either approve the permit or deny the National Christmas Trees permit too. If he disobeyed, Eisenstadt would take the matter straight to Carter, who would side with Eisenstadt, a major embarrassment for the secretary. So you can plainly see that had more to do with sharing the space with other Christmas symbols. The Christmas tree can't be the only symbol allowed. If the giant tree is allowed, then a privately funded menorah is allowed. Also, the assertion that the ACLU doesn't go after menorahs when they think they're violating the law isn't correct. Take the case of the county of Allegheny, I'm sorry if I butchered that name, versus the American Civil Liberties Union, for example. The case challenged, quote, 2 different holiday displays. The first was a creche located in the main staircase of a county court building with a sign above the manger reading Gloria in excelsis Deo, Latin for glory to God in the highest. The second display was located outside a county building and included an 18-foot Chinooka menorah next to a 45-foot Christmas tree with a sign declaring the city's salute to liberty. The result was, quote, regarding the creche, the court found that the inscription above the manger endorsed a patently Christian message because it proclaimed glory to God for the birth of Jesus Christ, and there was nothing surrounding the creche that detracted from its purely religious message. While the court noted in Lynch v. Donnelly that the government may acknowledge Christmas as a cultural phenomenon, the court concluded in the case that the government may not suggest that people praise God for the birth of Jesus. Thus, the creche constituted government endorsement of religion in violation of the First Amendment. In contrast, the court held that the menorah and the Christmas tree, with a sign saluting liberty, conveyed a message of pluralism and freedom of belief during the holiday season, which could not be reasonably interpreted as an endorsement of any religion in particular. So with that out of the way, let's fast forward past the rest of the menorah dialogue and get to his next major point, which is the establishment cause.
And here's the actual wording of the clause in the First Amendment that people use incorrectly. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So that does not say that you can't have a Christmas tree in the town square that the town pays money to have lit. It does not say that.
You're right. It doesn't state that specifically, but that's how it's being interpreted by the courts. I'm no constitutional lawyer, but surely you see the problem with the government specifically singling out one religion and promoting it. In this case, the plaintiff is saying that this tree, with its Christian imagery, is specifically promoting one religion. There are no other religions being promoted, just that cross, and it's being promoted by the government. By the way, since this video was made, the town council took down the cross because they didn't think they could win the court case.
It's saying, like I said earlier, you can't have the state come out and say, okay, you're going to be a Christian, or you can't be anything other than Christian or Protestant, Catholic, or whatever.
Right, but they also shouldn't be in the business of promoting one religion over another, or making other citizens feel as though they're second-rate citizens if they're not a Christian. I'm going to fast forward a bit to the next point I wanted to address.
How are you going to sue me as a Christian or whatever I decide to be for not giving you your service that you want if you're a Muslim? How can you say that I have to go and cater your gay wedding if I'm a Christian? Why must I bake your gay wedding cake? Right? That's just unfair. That's imposing your religion on me, even if you are irreligious.
Anthony, I think you're confusing the First Amendment with state discrimination laws. You can't discriminate based on sexual orientation, and the people not wanting to make the cake are free not to make cake decorating a part of their bakery business if they feel that strongly about their religious beliefs. Once you allow people to discriminate based on sexual orientation, you open the door to discrimination based on other arbitrary traits, such as race. So this has less to do with the Constitution and more to do with the discrimination laws and how they're implemented. Although you can argue that the 14th Amendment also protects people against discrimination.
Atheism really is a form of religion as well. And if it's not, I can't tell.
You should be able to tell, Anthony. There is no set of rules, dogmas, or beliefs one must adopt in order to be an atheist. The only requirement is a lack of belief in gods. Atheism is in no way a religion. It's not an ideology. It's not a set of rules to live your life by. There's nothing to worship, nothing to pray to, no atheist holy book, nothing. Now, I could take issue with what you're about to say about evolution and no evidence of transitional fossils, but I'll leave a few links in the description box that show there are transitional fossils. In closing, I want to say that even though I'm an atheist, I do feel a bit of sympathy for the townspeople who live in Knightstown. Like I wrote in my blog, I think legally the resident who filed the suit was likely right, and the town made the right decision to take the cross down rather than spend taxpayer money fighting a suit they'd likely lose. However, I think the lawsuit was whiny and petty and not the best use of resources. I know many atheists who would agree with that sentiment and many who would disagree, which is why we have courts of law that rule on these things. Ultimately, while we're all free to hold our own opinions on these matters, The fact remains that the plaintiff had a right to file the lawsuit, and no amount of emotional pleading about how many residents agree with the tree, or how many times people evoke appeals to tradition, the disgruntled resident had every right to do what he did, and the city would likely have lost the court case if they decided to fight it. So like the sound said on Facebook, the townsfolk can light crosses all over town on their private property, but for now at least they'll have to make do with a lighted star, or something else on top of their giant Christmas tree.